Welcome to PandaAudioBooks, the perfect place for a huge collection of fantasy novels. If you enjoy my content and want to support my work, a small contribution via PayPal is greatly appreciated. And don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and hit the notifications bell to stay updated with our latest audiobook chapters. Chapter 411, Rank 7 Mosey. The parrot never came back. Meng Hao wasn't too concerned about this. Who knew how many long years the parrot had lived, and yet it inherently seemed to like courting death. Nonetheless, it still hadn't died. Meng Hao was quite assured in its ability to survive. Furthermore, the meat jelly bell was with the parrot. If anything, the one to worry about wasn't the parrot, but the poor outlander beast. Several days passed, during which Meng Hao spent most of his time in his courtyard, studying his greenwood tree totem tattoo. It flickered there on his forehead, radiating boundless life force throughout his body. Every time he closed his eyes to meditate, it seemed that even his heartbeat could create ripples throughout the land and sky around him. This is only one of the 5 elements, a wood-type totem. It's already propelled my cultivation base much closer to the nascent soul stage. When his eyes opened, they glittered brightly. After carefully examining the totemic power within him, he had reached a new understanding. If I can acquire a second 5 elements totem, then my cultivation base, despite being at the full circle of the gold core, will actually be strong enough to fight the peak of the early nascent soul stage, even without the blood-colored mask. In fact, by using the power of the totems, I should be able to employ some of the divine abilities that belong to the nascent soul stage. During the same period of time, Meng Hao also experimented a bit with the neo-demon horde he had acquired from Mo Fang. He fed them with demon nurturing pills, and also took them out to hunt. In a relatively short period of time, they began to grow fiercer and tougher. Of course, due to the restraints of time, there was still a large gap between them and Big Hairy and the other Greenwood wolves. However, if things kept progressing the way they were, although they might not compare to the 5 Greenwood wolves, they would continue to transmogrify and grow stronger. Finally one afternoon, Meng Hao was sitting cross-legged meditating when suddenly, an enormous roaring sound shook the rear mountain district of the Crow Scout tribe. As the roaring echoed throughout the air, an enormous black python over 20 meters long shot toward Meng Hao in a beam of blackness. The black snake emitted a powerful aura, filled with savagery. Its forked tongue flicked in and out of its mouth, and its mere presence sent the aura in the area into chaos. Furthermore, a black, churning mist with a celestial appearance seethed around it as it flew. Standing on top of the black snake was an old man in a black robe. His expression was grim, and his eyes were filled with arrogance and contempt as the black snake neared and then floated in the air above Meng Hao's courtyard. The old man looked down with a condescending look at Meng Hao. The old man's cultivation base was not extremely high, only at the mid-core formation stage. However, his body was festooned with complex totem tattoos, which emanated shocking ripples. Because of them, the man actually emanated an aura similar to that of the nascent soul stage. "So, you're Meng Hao," boomed a voice like that of rolling thunders. It didn't sound like the voice of a human, but rather like the combined roaring of countless beasts. The sound rolled out in all directions, causing all of the cultivators in the rear mountain district to tremble in their hearts. All of the neo-demons began to tremble in fear. There were people who immediately recognized the man who rode on the black snake. Rank 7 Dragoneer Grandmaster Mosey. It really is Grandmaster Mosey. So, he's come looking for Grandmaster Meng. Grandmaster Meng took away Mo Fang's neo-demon horde. It won't do any good even if the Great Father and the others interfered now. This will be the Crow Scout tribe's first battle between Dragoneers. Grandmaster Mo versus Grandmaster Meng. Meng Hao sat cross-legged in his courtyard. He slowly opened his eyes, and they gleamed with coldness. He looked up indifferently at the black-robed old man who floated in mid-air atop the black snake. He merely looked up. There was no shocking sharpness in his gaze, nor did he say any heaven-shaking words. He just looked over. As his gaze passed over the wildly arrogant and fierce black snake, it suddenly began to tremble. Terrifying waves of fear suddenly rose up in its simplistic mind. Meng Hao's gaze had seemed relatively casual, nor could the old man see any clues as to what was going on. But the black neo-demon snake shook violently, and its mind and heart reeled. Fear and awe welled up from its very soul. It almost seemed like pressure was bearing down on its life force. The fear and awe it felt in its soul would most likely also be present even in the ancient ancestor which gave birth to this creature's bloodline. It too would tremble in fear in front of Meng Hao. The unspeakable aura he emanated made the black snake hold him in as much awe as the heavens. It took only one look, and the black snake let out a shrill howl, then immediately retreated backward. The shocked old man in the black robe did everything he could, but the black snake was completely incapable of recovering. It was only after Meng Hao looked away a moment later that the black snake managed to straighten itself up. If Meng Hao had looked at it any longer, it would probably have simply fallen down out of the sky. No observer could see what had happened. However, Mozi's heart trembled, and he could barely prevent himself from gasping. His eyes were wide. He had come here in an overbearing fashion in order to punish Meng Hao and take back the Neo-Demon Horde. Suddenly, all of his plans completely changed. He floated there in midair, glaring down at Meng Hao, a multitude of thoughts running through his head. Damn it, he thought. No wonder the Great Father, Grand Elder and others did nothing to stop me from coming here. It turns out this guy is a high-level Dragoneer. Just what rank is he? How can I help you? Asked Meng Hao coolly. His voice was calm, but his eyes were filled with coldness. He looked up at rank 7 Dragoner Mozi, and suddenly realized that the totems on the man's body were quite interesting. I am Mozi. Fellow Daoist Meng, my son is not a good student, but he spent half his life painstakingly collecting his Neo-Demon Horde. I demand an explanation regarding this matter. However, we are both Dragoneers. In 1 month, the day will come in which the 5 tribes of the Crow divinity go to worship their ancestor. At that time, the order of who enters the ancestor's land will be determined by a competition between the 5 great tribes. On that day, I hope to experience your secret Dragoneer arts. Mozi didn't know what rank Dragoneer Meng Hao was. Having come here, however, he couldn't just leave immediately. Therefore, he forced these words out, then turned and left with his black snake. As he left, he made up his mind. I must determine for sure what rank Dragoneer he is. I can't do anything rash. I'll use the 5 great tribes competition to determine how much of him is true and how much is false. He arrived abruptly and left quickly. The surrounding onlookers saw everything that happened and could only watch on in shock. Meng Hao also stared in surprise for a moment. It only took a moment's thought to realize why rank 7 Dragoneer Mozi had come here. However, his motives in coming and going were quite contradictory. Meng Hao smiled coldly, and his eyes glittered. So, the awaited time has come. The 5 great tribes will offer sacrifices to their ancestor. The only way to do that is to enter the Crow Divinity Holy Land. That is the prescribed rendezvous point with the others. However, now that I have my wood-type totem, getting into the Holy Land isn't that important. Furthermore, the Crow Scout tribe has actually treated me quite well. After a moment's thought, he closed his eyes to continue his research on his greenwood tree totem. The next day at dawn, when light was just appearing in the sky, Meng Hao emerged from his trance. He looked around at his silent Neo-Demon Horde. Currently, his dozens of Neo-Demons were organized into 3 groups. The first was the Greenwood Wolves, led by Big Hairy. Another was the Greenwood Bats, led by the Black Bat. There was a big difference in the numbers populating the 2 groups. There were a few more Greenwood Wolves, however, the Greenwood Bats had more mid-level Neo-Demons. The 2 groups weren't necessarily evenly matched, but there was a clear delineation between the 2. They didn't get along very well, and a bit of hostility existed. The third group was comprised of Greenwood Snakes. Their numbers lay between those of the Greenwood Wolves and the Greenwood Bats. However, in terms of strength, they didn't measure up to either of the others. Being the lowest position, they showed complete awe for Big Hairy and the Black Bat. Meng Hao looked thoughtfully for a while at the 3 groups of Neo-Demons. Then, his body flickered as he left the courtyard. Behind him, Big Hairy looked up, then also turned into a blur as he followed, along with the rest of the Greenwood Wolf Neo-Demon Horde. The Black Bat's eyes flickered, and it flew up into the air, bringing the Greenwood Bats with it. The Greenwood Snakes took the flanking position as Meng Hao left the rear mountain district. The entire way, any of the Crow Scout tribe members who saw Meng Hao would look at him in awe, then lower their heads and do their best to avoid him. After leaving the Crow Scout tribe, Meng Hao found himself in the surrounding mountain forest. As he usually did, he sent the various neo-demon hordes in different directions to hunt for food. As for himself, he sat down cross-legged underneath a tall tree to meditate. Big Hairy didn't leave, but rather lay down next to Meng Hao. He looked lazy, but in truth, his eyes were filled with vigilance and coldness as he looked around. Meng Hao had been in the Crow Scout tribe for more than half a year now. During that time, he had often taken his Greenwood wolves out to hunt. Each time, Big Hairy would keep a close watch on Meng Hao. As for food, it was usually brought back to him by the other Greenwood wolves. Unless Meng Hao ordered him, he would never leave his side. Now, Meng Hao's neo-demon horde had grown much stronger and larger. Nonetheless, Big Hairy continued to act the same as before. Meng Hao petted Big Hairy's head. As he did, he thought of the mastiff. He suddenly sent his mind into the blood-colored mask. Sensing that the mastiff was still in a state of slumber, he sighed. When will you finally wake up? He thought. He retracted his spiritual sense, then looked at the surrounding forest. A breeze wafted through the trees, giving rise to a rustling sound. At first glance, it almost looked like the southern domain. However, there was also something unfamiliar about it. It didn't feel like home at all. After leaving the Black Lands, the power of the celestial talisman that was interfering with the G clan's search for me must have vanished. From now on, I need to be ready at any time for the G clan to come after me. Although, despite being away from the Black Lands, perhaps I have enough celestial talisman power on my person to continue to provide interference. He looked up into the sky, his heart filled with questions. During the past more than half year, he hadn't seen a single person from the G clan. Now he was starting to come to the conclusion that acquiring the celestial talisman symbols and using them to gain enlightenment must be one of the main reasons that the G clan wasn't coming after him. The G clan, he thought, his eyes filling with coldness. One of these days, I will become strong. Then the G clan will be forced to acknowledge my superiority. He took a deep breath, and determination filled his eyes. It was at this moment that Meng Hao's mind suddenly flickered. He turned his head to look off into the distance. In addition, a high-pitched voice suddenly drifted into his ears from off into the distance. It doesn't matter if the first person to spot that iron-black snake was you or me. My master is rank 7, Dragoneer Gu Lane. Do you really dare to contend with this young master? Chapter 412. My master is Gu La. The wooded mountain where Meng Hao was located wasn't close to the Crow Scout tribe. Actually, it was some distance away in the boundless mountain chain. In accord with his usual custom, Meng Hao took his neo-demon horde to increasingly remote areas. Hearing the voice, he didn't move, but rather just listened for a while. Usually, Meng Hao didn't run into people out here. He was usually alone. Therefore, after hearing the voice, Meng Hao sent out some spiritual sense to check out the situation. Not far off, separated from Meng Hao by a medium-sized mountain, was a group of 7 or 8 Crow Scout tribe members. Currently, they were facing off wrathfully against a group of 3 others. From their clothing, it was obvious these others were Crow Soldier tribe members. In the middle position of these 3 people was a young man. His cultivation base was at the early foundation establishment stage. The 2 people flanking him were a bit older, and their faces were covered with cold grins, as well as contempt, as they stared at the Crow Scout tribe members. Surprisingly, Wu Chen and Wu Ling were among the Crow Scout tribe members. Wu Hai was also there, as well as a few others with whom Meng Hao was familiar. All were outstanding figures in the younger generation of the Crow Scout tribe. They were surrounded by neo-demons, all of whom radiated fierce auras and glared at the 3 Crow Soldier tribe members. Situated between the 2 groups was an indistinct, shimmering net. Laying unconscious and motionless within the net was a small, black snake. Wu Ling gritted her beautiful teeth and said, "We found that iron-black snake." We paid a heavy price for it, too. We captured it, so what the hell gives you the right to take it? The young man from the Crow Soldier tribe laughed coldly, virtually ignoring the members of the Crow Scout tribe. He walked toward the black net and then waved his hand, clearly intent on taking it away. Wu Ling clenched her jaw and then performed an incantation with her right hand. Instantly, the greenwood wolf next to her leaped forward. At the same time, totemic power billowed out from Wu Ling's body. When this happened, a look of disdain appeared in the eyes of the Crow Soldier tribe youth. He waved his left hand, whereupon a pitch-black, decomposing zombie wolf materialized. It lifted its head up and roared as it shot toward Wu Ling. The faces of all of the Crow Scout tribe members instantly flickered, and they attacked simultaneously. A huge boom rang out, and the Crow Scout tribe members staggered backward, spitting up blood. Level 6 Neo-Demon, cried Wu Hai bitterly. Wu Chen's face was ashen. Wu Ling looked like she knew what she was doing, but unfortunately, there was nothing they could actually do. The rotting zombie wolf stood there looking at them coldly. My Crow Soldier tribe and your Crow Scout tribe have the same roots. If it weren't for that, all of you would die today for provoking me. The young man looked scornfully over the Crow Scout tribe members, then snatched up the black net. He turned to leave, then suddenly looked back. He had just caught sight of Hairy Number 5, who lay off in the forest, observing the goings-on. Hairy Number 5 was usually relatively high-spirited, and was deeply curious about all sorts of matters. Moments ago, he had been passing by, and his attention had been caught by the putrescent zombie wolf. He couldn't help but look on with wide eyes. "Whoa," said the young man, his eyes suddenly brightening with pleasure as he looked at Hairy Number 5. "That wolf is extraordinary. I can't believe I ran into a greenwood wolf like that in this place. If I can take it back as a gift for Master, he'll definitely be extremely pleased." He laughed loudly. His two fellow tribe members next to him looked at Hairy Number 5 with expressions of pleasant surprise. Hairy Number 5 was no longer small, and had quite a mighty bearing. They could instantly see that he was far from ordinary. "Hairy Number 5, said Wu Chen, recognizing him instantly. After staring in shock for a moment, his heart suddenly filled with joy. He looked around, and though he didn't see anything in particular, he knew what it meant if Hairy Number 5 was in the area. Wu Hai's expression also filled with joy. It was only Wu Ling who had mixed feelings. As for the other Crow Scout tribe members, they all recognized Hairy Number 5 as well, and were instantly filled with happiness. Hearing them call out his name, Hairy Number 5 turned his head in surprise. He looked at them for a moment, then turned back with curiosity to stare at the zombie wolf. A look of savagery appeared on the face of the young man. He couldn't care less that the Crow Scout tribe members recognized this greenwood wolf. As far as he was concerned, anything he looked at, especially things that he wanted to give as a gift to his master, he could take. The entire Crow Soldier tribe would definitely approve. As far as the other tribes went, there was hardly anyone who could possibly contend with his master. "Get me that wolf. I want it alive." As soon as the words left his mouth, the two people standing next to him sprang into action. Simultaneously, the rotting wolf zombie shot toward Hairy Number 5. As the two cultivators flew through the air, their totem tattoos shone brightly, transforming into an enormous net which flew to encircle Hairy Number 5. Hairy Number 5's eyes flashed with coldness, and then his body flickered, exploding forward in attack. His mouth opened wide as he bit toward the youth. His speed was such that the young man had no time to react. In the blink of an eye, he was directly in front of the young man. As this happened, a black light sprung out from the young man's body. The black light slammed into Hairy Number 5, who let out a miserable cry. Immediately, black aura began to emit from his body, and he quickly retreated. As he did, the putrefying zombie wolf closed in on him, its eyes glowing with grim coldness. It opened its mouth wide as it prepared to bite into Hairy Number 5. It was at this moment that a howl suddenly could be heard from the nearby forest. A green beam of light shot out to slam into the body of the zombie wolf. It shook as it flew backward like a kite with its string cut. As it was thrown off to the side, Hairy Number 4 suddenly appeared to stand next to Hairy Number 5. He looked toward the three Crow Soldier tribe members, snarling at them to reveal his sharp teeth. "Two. Ha ha. "There's two," cried the young man. "If I present them both to Master, he'll definitely be thrilled." The young man was actually shocked inwardly. The attack just now had been too fast for him to even react to. Were it not for the protective totem his master had given him, he would have been torn in two just now. This only made him more desirous of hairy number 5. His eyes glowed with coldness. He waved his right hand, causing a black bracelet to fly out. It suddenly let out a bang as it disintegrated in mid-air. It then transformed into a vortex, from within which multiple growling roars could be heard. Several black beams of light suddenly shot out, which transformed into more than 20 completely putrescent zombie wolves. "Attack! I don't care who lives or dies, just make sure the bodies of the Greenwood wolves don't get too torn up." Vicious hatred emanated out from the young man's eyes. As soon as the zombie wolves appeared, a noxious reek billowed out. Furthermore, the forest floor in all directions began to wither and turn black. The faces of the Crow Scout tribe members instantly fell. "Hairy number 4, hairy number 5, get out of here," cried Wu Chen urgently. "Die!" cried the young man, laughing as he pointed toward Wu Chen and the others. Immediately, 4 of the zombie wolves turned toward the Crow Scout tribe members, then turned into black beams of light as they shot forward in attack. The rest of the zombie wolves radiated savagery and madness as they charged toward Harris number 4 and number 5. Meng Hao frowned as watched all of this happen. Finally, he gave a cold snort. Big Hairy looked up and began to howl. Immediately the sound of the howl filled the forest. Harris number 2 and number 3, as well as the rest of the Greenwood wolves, were all in the area. Hearing the howl, they immediately charged in the direction of Harris number 4 and number 5. Their speed was such that it only took a blink of an eye for the young man as well as the Crow Scout tribe members to see multiple beams of green light shooting toward them from within the surrounding forest. Suddenly, more than 20 Greenwood wolves were there, each one beyond ordinary, emanating incredible might. This was especially true of 2 of their number, which were more than 9 meters long and emanated flickering green glows. The savagery and coldness which shone in their eyes filled the entire area. The young man's face immediately fell. The rotting zombie wolves that were flying through the air sensed the sudden impending crisis, and immediately stopped and looked around vigilantly. "Hairy number 2. Hairy number 3, shouted Wu Chen excitedly. The young man from the Crow Soldier tribe looked shocked. The other 2 tribe members next to him also looked around in surprise at the approaching Greenwood wolves. "I never thought my luck would look so good," said the young man after a moment, laughing loudly. "So many excellent Greenwood wolves to present to Master. In his heart, I will definitely surpass second elder brother and first elder brother." However, even as his laughter rang out through the woods, a savage howl ripped through the air in the forest. It circled about in all directions, along with an arrogant aura which immediately caused the neo-demons in the area to begin to tremble. Even the cultivators of the Crow Scout and Crow Soldier tribes felt their minds trembling. At the same time, a white blur appeared, shooting with such speed that nothing was visible but whiteness. The white blur slammed into 7 or 8 of the zombie wolves, whereupon booms echoed out along with blood-curdling shrieks. The zombie wolves all exploded, sending a stinking black mist roiling out in all directions. The world-shaking white blur then transformed into a white wolf who stood there with utmost grandeur, as if he could look down upon all heaven and earth. The white wolf's body wasn't very large, and even looked somewhat weak. But the instant he appeared, all of the other Greenwood wolves immediately fell prone, emanating an air of allegiance. The white wolf raised its head up and howled, and as it did, the other Greenwood wolves joined him. Within an instant, the entire wolf pack was howling in unison, causing everything in the area to shake. Even the trees were trembling. The zombie wolves began to quiver, and their listless eyes filled with veneration and submission. A white wolf king! This was what each and every one of the observing cultivators was thinking at the moment. White Wolf King. The young man's facial expression immediately changed, and he began to breathe heavily. He stepped back a few paces, looking at the White Wolf King, his eyes filling with unprecedented madness and avarice. White Wolf King. Who could have imagined that this place would have a Wolf King? Once Master finds out, he's going to be delighted. It doesn't matter who this Wolf King belongs to, now that it has appeared, it belongs to me. The young man roared as he suddenly stretched out his right hand, within which he held a jade slip. Using the fastest speed he could muster, he crushed it, which sent a message to his master, Gu Lane. Meng Hao, who was still observing the proceedings with spiritual sense, finally gave a cold snort and then strode forward. Chapter 4:13 Meet. At the same time that the young man crushed the jade slip, not too far away in the same mountain chain were two peaks that seemed to wish to climb up into the highest heights of the clouds. They towered over the earth, looking out in all directions, two powerful magical warriors, the sight of which would send shock into anyone's heart. Every day at noon, when the sunlight was densest, these two mountains would shine with a silver light. This light was the type that could split heaven and earth. It circulated around in the area, sending off powerful ripples. This was none other than the home of the Crow Soldier tribe. On the second peak of the Crow Soldier tribe was a limestone crag upon which sat 7 or 8 members of the Crow Soldier tribe, all smiling respectfully. Sitting in their midst was a middle-aged man who joked and laughed with the surrounding tribe members. He wore a black robe, and was clearly beyond ordinary. His eyes contained the stars, and if you looked at them long enough, you could sense a certain sharpness. All of it made him like the sun. Without even trying, he became the center of attention. And that is just a fundamental quality of the magic of Dragoneers, said the man coolly. If you want your Tao of Dragoneering to live forever, and wish to experience progress, then the only option is to look for the answer within your own flesh and blood and bones. That is where you will find the path you must tread. He wore a smile on his face, although there was no kindness in it. Rather, he emanated a lofty and proud air. If you looked closely, however, you would be able to see a bit of an emotional sigh contained within them. The people surrounding him were for the most part outstanding members of the tribe. All had cultivation bases at the core formation stage. Each and every one wore thoughtful expressions. Grandmaster Gu, you truly deserve to be a rank 7 Dragoneer. Although we've never heard anything like this before, after some thought, it really makes sense. That's right. Grandmaster Gu, it seems you've truly found your own path as a Dragoneer. You have limitless future potential. I think that in all of the 5 tribes of the Crow divinity, to find someone who could match you in terms of secret Dragoneer arts would be as difficult as finding phoenix feathers or Chilean horns. The proud, middle-aged man engaging in the lively discussion was none other than Gu La, with whom Meng Hao had lost contact during the teleportation to this region. At that time, Meng Hao had rendered Gu La unconscious during his meeting with the other nascent soul eccentrics regarding the 5 tribes of the Crow divinity. Therefore, Gu La was completely unaware of any of those matters. All he knew was that when he woke up, he was back in the Western Desert. Most importantly, there was no sign of that terrifying, inhuman person who plagued him with fear during the day and roamed in his nightmares at night. At first, Gu La had stared in shock. Then he had searched around, filled with disbelief. However, the only thing he had found was the unconscious wild giant. After repeated searches of the area without finding Meng Hao, his body had begun to tremble, and finally, he lifted his head up and let out a roar. He had thought about all the torment and maltreatment he had endured in the past. He thought about how many times his flesh and blood had been studied. All of it caused tears to stream down Gu La's face as he roared. These were the tears of happiness seen on the face of someone who survived a great disaster. Strangely, he also found that for some reason, his skills in the Dragoneer arts had increased, and he was now rank 7. In his belief, everything that he had endured had moved the heavens. Finally, a conscience had appeared in that inhuman being, and the man had decided to let him go. Therefore, he left the mountains with the wild giant. Soon, he experienced a vast change in situation as he became a famous Dragoneer of the Crow Soldier tribe. As the surrounding Crow Soldier tribe members continued to speak, Gu La laughed proudly and was about to continue speaking when suddenly his expression flickered. He slapped his bag of holding to produce a jade slip. The instant it appeared, cracking sounds could be heard. Everyone's gaze came to focus on the jade slip as it collapsed into pieces. "Oh," said Gu La, a cold light shining within his eyes. His voice cool, he continued, "that would be one of my 3 apprentices. It looks like one of them has run into some trouble on the outside. He waved his right hand, causing the remnants of the jade slip to transform into fragments. The resulting powder began to glow, and then turned into a faintly discernible image. Within, Big Hairy could be seen charging forward, emanating the elegant bearing of a wolf king. Seeing the image, the eyes of all the surrounding Crow Soldier tribe members immediately went wide, as did Jiyu La's. He stared fixedly at Big Hairy, then began to laugh loudly. It seems my third apprentice really is ingenious. He truly is an outstanding member of the Crow Soldier tribe. He's even gone and found a wolf king for me. Excellent, excellent. Continuing to laugh, Jiyu La shot up into the air, followed by the chuckling Crow Soldier tribe members. Congratulations, Grandmaster Jiyu. It looks like you've acquired another Neo-Demon Wolf King. However, that particular Wolf King looks like a Greenwood wolf. Could it possibly have something to do with the Crow Scout tribe? Even if it does, who cares? If Grandmaster Jiyu takes a fancy to something, even Mozi from the Crow Scout tribe could do nothing but bow his head. Amidst the chatter and laughter surrounding him, Jiyu La laughed loudly and tilted his head up with an expression of pride. I, Jiyu La, will not blithely take a beast away from someone without paying. Whoever the master of that Wolf King is, I will obviously offer some compensation. In fact, if he's talented enough, then I might even accept that person as an apprentice. With that, Jiyu La flicked his sleeve and shot off into the air. The surrounding Crow Soldier tribe members' faces filled with admiration as they clustered around Jiyu La and flew away with him in the direction indicated by the jade slip. All of them transformed into prismatic beams that shot off into the distance. Meanwhile, back in the thick mountain forest, even as Meng Hao strode forward, and the white wolf made its grand entrance, the young man from the Crow Soldier tribe crushed the jade slip and then ripped open the front of his garment. Immediately, a black stone could be seen hanging around his neck. He grabbed it and threw it out in front of him. I summon Demon Doyen Flood Dragon, cried the youth, his eyes filled with madness. At the same time, he bit down on the tip of his tongue, spitting out a mouthful of blood. Simultaneously, his fellow tribe members next to him also spit up some blood. The blood from the three people was sucked into the black stone, which then exploded, transforming into ripples that spread out in all directions, along with a heaven-shaking roar. Within the roar, a flood dragon emerged. Its body was several dozen meters long, and its appearance caused everything in the surrounding mountainous forest to shake. A massive pressure rolled out, pushing down onto everything. This particular dragon was actually not complete. Portions of it were in a state of decay. In fact, bones were visible in quite a few areas. A rotten stench emanated out as it appeared, filling the area. Demon, exterminate these things. The young man's eyes radiated madness. This flood dragon was a life-saving neo-demon gifted to him by his master. It was not level 6, but rather level 7. It was incredibly powerful, and in the eyes of the young man, once this demon doyen appeared, he should be able to finish the battle before his master arrived. That's level 7. He actually has a level 7 neo-demon. Impossible. The faces of the surrounding Crow Scout tribe members immediately flickered, filling with disbelief. Even Mo Fang from the Crow Scout tribe didn't have a level 7 neo-demon. Such creatures were very difficult to control. My master is Grandmaster Jiyu Lane. To him, nothing is impossible. The young man laughed uproariously as the flood dragon roared and shot toward Big Hairy. Meng Hao strode through the forest, using his spiritual sense to observe what was happening. Seeing everything happening, a strange expression appeared on his face. As soon as the rotting zombie wolf had appeared, Meng Hao was astonished at how different Jiyu La's neo-demons were from everyone else's. Then the flood dragon appeared. Meng Hao recognized it instantly. It was, in fact, a flood dragon that he himself had killed and then given to Jiyu La as food for the wild giant. Even as Meng Hao scanned the area with spiritual sense, Big Hairy let out a growling roar. His body flickered and he transformed into a white blur that shot toward the flood dragon. At the same time, the surrounding Greenwood wolves instantly fell upon the putrefying zombie wolves, and a vicious, deadly battle erupted. Booms rang out, accompanied by howls and roars as the Greenwood wolves tangled with the zombie wolves. At the same time, Big Hairy and the Flood Dragon fought back and forth fiercely. Because of Big Hairy's fierceness and incredibly high life force, it didn't matter that the Flood Dragon was level 7. It couldn't do anything to even scratch Big Hairy. In fact, it continued to retreat, until finally Big Hairy had had enough. He let out a tremendous roar, and began to shake. In the blink of an eye, his body expanded to a size of over 30 meters. He looked like a small, white mountain. His aura emanated up endlessly so that in an instant, he suddenly exerted tremendous pressure down onto the Flood Dragon. Big Hairy's aura spread out in all directions, giving rise to a white-colored tempest that rose up to the heavens. Accompanied by an earth-shaking roar, Big Hairy charged toward the Flood Dragon, slamming into it and causing it to let out a miserable shriek. Its already damaged body began to collapse and fly about in all directions. Big Hairy's jaws latched onto the Flood Dragon's head, and he ripped it off with a howl. Squeals filled the air as the Greenwood wolves attacked relentlessly. It took only a moment for all of the rotting zombie wolves to be torn to pieces. The Crow Scout tribe members' spirits were instantly lifted. Wu Chen clenched his fists, his face filled with excitement. On the other hand, the face of young man from the Crow Soldier tribe, as well as the faces of his 2 companions, instantly went deathly pale. Without thinking about it, they backed up, breathing heavily. Complete disbelief filled the eyes of Grandmaster Jiu La's 3rd apprentice. That's a level 8 Wolf King. It was at this exact moment that a black streak of light appeared from off to the side. It shot toward Big Hairy, and then transformed into the shocking black bat, as well as a large group of other Greenwood bats. A horde of Greenwood snakes also appeared, hissing loudly as they emerged from the forest. That's a Bat King," said the young man, his face filled with dread as he continued to back up. How could he ever have imagined that he would manage to provoke such a horde of neo-demons? It doesn't matter if there are 2 neo-demon kings. You've run into me today, so now your lives belongs to me, said the young man through clenched teeth. His eyes filled with venomous hatred as he slapped his bag of holding to produce a chunk of black-colored meat. As soon as the meat appeared, a shocking sound rumbled out from the surrounding forest. It was a roar that sounded as if it could shred the heavens. Meat. Chapter 4:14. Master, save me. The roar rumbled out, shaking the heavens and causing the land to tremble. The surrounding forest burst into chaos, as if a tempest had sprung into being and was preparing to shred all life into ash. Within the roar contained a mighty pressure that all cultivators could sense. It instantly caused the faces of the Crow Scout tribe members to fall. Blood sprayed from their mouths and their ears rang. All of the white fur on Big Hairy's body stood on end, and shockingly, he emanated an aura of vigilance. His eyes were filled with freezing coldness, and not even the slightest scrap of feeling could be detected therein, only killing intent. He lowered his head and instinctively began to emit low-pitched, threatening growls. The black bat next to him looked equally serious. It glared off toward where the growl came from, its eyes flickering mysteriously. It slowly opened its mouth, baring its sharp, vicious teeth. They were the only neo-demons in the area who had such a reaction. The rest of them began trembling as soon as they heard the roar. One by one, they dropped prone to the ground, as because of the mighty pressure, they didn't dare to move. Even Hairy number 2 and the others had to force themselves to even lift their heads up. Their eyes were filled with fear and struggle as they let out low-pitched howls. As for the young man and the other 2 from the Crow Soldier tribe, their faces flickered and they trembled. The young man quickly took the piece of meat he held in his hand and prepared to throw it out in front of him. "You're dead," he cried. "Nobody can save you now." As the roar echoed toward them from off in the distance, Meng Hao finally emerged from the forest to stand in front of everyone. The Crow Scout tribe members looked over one by one, and their expressions were the same as if they had just seen a blood relative. They immediately began to clasp hands and excitedly bow to him. "Grandmaster Meng! It's Grandmaster Meng! Greetings, Grandmaster Meng!" This was especially true of Wu Chen. He was the first one to catch sight of Meng Hao, and his expression was one of extreme excitement. Catching sight of Meng Hao here filled him not just with simple respect, but something bordering on fanaticism. Wu Hai gave a slight, inward sigh of relief. Next to him, Wu Ling had a complex expression and subconsciously lowered her head. Meng Hao gave smiling nods to everyone. Then, his gaze shifted off into the distance. He could sense the pressure weighing down on everything, and as he did, he smiled. There was no need for him to even check with spiritual sense. He could tell that off in the distant forest was none other than a wild giant. It was striding toward them at top speed, most likely drooling at the same time. As soon as Meng Hao appeared, it was as if all the pressure suddenly lifted from the neo-demons. One by one, they stood up, their dignity and might restored. Hairy number 2 trotted over to Meng Hao, a happy expression in his eyes. It only took a moment for Meng Hao to be surrounded by neo-demons. Big Hair's body flickered as he, too, returned to Meng Hao's side. He no longer looked completely savage, but rather clever and charming. The black bat hesitated for a moment, then flew over to Meng Hao's side. However, it continued to glance with cold eyes off into the distance. "Grandmaster Meng," said Jiu La's third apprentice, his bearing arrogant and disdainful. "Since when did your Crow Scout tribe get somebody named Grandmaster Meng? Presumably this neo-demon horde belongs to you." "Well, my master is rank 7, Dragoneer Grandmaster Jiu Lane of the Crow Soldier tribe. If you're smart, you'll hand over the neo-demon horde to me immediately. If you don't, you'll have to face my master, who's on the way here right now. And guess what? There's also a wild giant coming." Even as he spoke, the ground trembled, and another roar from off in the distance shook everything. "Meet! Meet!" The voice was like thunder, sweeping across everything. The Crow Scout tribe members continued to appear to be at a loss as the ground heaved. The neo-demons next to Meng Hao, with the exception of Big Hairy and the Black Bat, all began to growl as they sensed a feeling of imminent crisis. "Do you hear that?" said the young man excitedly. "That's the roar of a wild giant. That's none other than my master's demonic Dharma protector, an ancient neo-demon that he personally subjugated years ago. A wild giant." He laughed boisterously. Wild giants eat other neo-demons for lunch, and are rarely seen in the Western Desert. According to legend, they rarely bond masters. However, my master was able to bond this one, and that's why it follows his commands. The ground trembled once again, and the roar of the wild giant seemed even closer. The Crow Scout tribe members began to back up, and the growling roars of the neo-demons grew louder. Meng Hao was the only one who just stood there smiling as he looked out into the forest. It seems Jiu La really does have some talent, thought Meng Hao. After giving him the job of feeding the wild giant, he realized after we got split up that he could use food to control it. "Scared yet?" cried the young man. "Once the wild giant appears, all of you are dead." He lifted his head up and laughed uproariously as the ground shook beneath him. Off in the distance, an enormous figure could already be seen striding with great steps through the forest. Its frame was gigantic, and it emanated a barbaric aura as it roared viciously. As of now, everyone present could see it. "Meet! Meet!" Another roar filled the surroundings, circling around and echoing like thunder. At the same time, the wild giant suddenly leaped up into the air. It shot out of the forest, flying up until it obscured the sun with its enormous frame. Beneath, the Crow Scout tribe members' eyes were wide and filled with shock and amazement. They couldn't even breathe as they looked up at the shocking wild giant. Jiu La's third apprentice stood there cool and composed. However, he was actually nervous inwardly. If it wasn't for the fact that it was absolutely necessary, and also that he knew his master was on the way, he would never have called the wild giant here. The wild giant was an irascible neo-demon who only showed up because of food. Even his master Jiu La treated the wild giant very politely and was constantly feeding it. He would even scratch its back when it was preparing to sleep. "Esteemed wild giant, they are your food," he cried, sounding very much like his master. Body trembling, he let out a roar and then tossed the piece of meat he held directly toward Meng Hao. At the same time, he retreated back. The other 2 Crow Soldier tribe members made to follow, their faces pale and their bodies trembling. However, they were a bit too late. The wild giant descended like a storm. Even while it was still in midair, its huge hand shot down toward the ground and snatched up one of the 2 Crow soldier tribe cultivators. The man screamed as the wild giant tossed him into its mouth. Crunching sounds could be heard, and then the man was swallowed down. "Meat! Meat!" roared the wild giant. In its eyes, it didn't care at all about cultivators or neo-demons. Its eyes were fixed on the chunk of small meat whistling through the air. Its hand shot out to snatch it up. Seeing his fellow tribe member grabbed and eaten caused the young apprentice's heart to fill with alarm. Even stronger, though, was the cruelty that welled up within him. He saw the wild giant's hand moving toward Meng Hao, and began to laugh wildly. "The neo-demons that young master wanted are just about." Before he could finish speaking, his eyes suddenly went wide and filled with disbelief. He stared, gaping, first confused and then struck dumb with amazement. This was because Meng Hao suddenly spoke. "All you think about all day is eating meat. Get your butt over here." Then the young man saw what Meng Hao did. He reached out and grabbed the piece of meat and watched the wild giant nearing. Shockingly, as soon as the wild giant heard Meng Hao's words, its entire body began to tremble. It was as if to the wild giant, Meng Hao's voice contained heavenly pressure. It seemed as if no matter how hungry or wild it became, it would never be able to forget Meng Hao's voice for its entire life. The wild giant's eyes went wide as it recalled the scene of the man standing on its head, rousing the demonic chi in the area, and asking it if it was willing to capitulate and pledge allegiance. Its enormous hand suddenly came to a stop only a meter away from Meng Hao. It stared at Meng Hao for a moment, and as it did, the frenzy in its eyes faded. It turned instead into happiness, as well as a bit of frustration, as if it were nursing a grievance. It let out a massive roar. The happiness was because of finally being able to find its master. The frustration was because it was never able to eat until being full recently, and was depressed because it had been unable to find Meng Hao. All of these feelings leaked out into the massive roar. "Shut up and get over here," chided Meng Hao. The enormous wild giant immediately quieted down and stepped over to Meng Hao's side, as obedient as a kitten. It carefully avoided all of the other neo-demons and then squatted down next to Meng Hao. Its face was filled with happiness as well as obedience. This caused the minds of everyone present to reel. Everything seemed to be happening opposite to expectation, and it caused their minds to be complete blanks. Moments ago, the wild giant had been filled with incomparable mania. Now, however, it was clearly very obedient, and not the least bit ferocious. In fact, it really looked as if it had just found its master. The ease with which it squatted down seemed to come from force of habit, as if it had done so many times in front of Meng Hao. All of this caused a complete silence to fill the air. Wu Chen stared. Wu Hai panted. Wu Ling gaped. As for Jiyu La's third apprentice, the young man, he simply was incapable of reconciling the image of the frenzied, man-eating wild giant that even his master was careful around, with the obedient, puppy-like thing that he saw just now. His mind reeled, and he suddenly had the feeling that this wild giant was not his master's after all, but instead belonged to this Grandmaster Meng whom he had never seen before. "I let my wild giant roam free in this area, and you called it here to attack me," said Meng Hao, looking at the young man with an expression that was a smile, and also not a smile. The young man opened his mouth, but his brain was empty. He couldn't think of anything to say. Everything that had happened had turned his mind and heart inside out. However, it was at this moment that 7 or 8 beams of prismatic light appeared off in the distance. In the lead was none other than Jiyu La, a look of dignity covering his face as he shot booming through the air. Immediately, the young man came to his senses. He looked up into the air with a look of excitement. "Master, save me!" Chapter 415. Grandmaster Heula. "What are you losing your head over? I'm here. Who is there that would dare to harm my apprentice?" Jiyu La was wearing a luxurious robe, and his hair floated in the wind as he flew down from up in the air. His expression was one of pride and aloofness, as if he were the most esteemed person under heaven. This was especially true considering he stood atop a 30-meter-long flood dragon with violet scales. The flood dragon's fierce eyes were pale white, making it so that even though the dragon emitted a strong aura of death, it still looked divine and mighty, anything but ordinary. Its domineering aura was enough to cause anyone to take it very seriously. Jiyu La stood there atop the flood dragon, emanating billowing aura. Next to him, the other Crow Soldier tribe cultivators all had cultivation bases at the core formation stage. Clearly, none were ordinary tribe members, but rather influential figures. They clustered around Jiyu La as he shot down from the sky. Jiyu La glanced coolly over the situation, his expression one of authority. The first thing he saw, naturally, was the enormous figure of the wild giant. However, because of the angle, he was unable to see Meng Hao standing on the other side of the wild giant. All he could see was the wild giant's obedient posture, which seemed a bit odd. Regardless of anything, however, he was incapable of connecting the wild giant's obedient behavior to Meng Hao. In his mind, this was the Western Desert, and that inhuman freak had forgotten about him long ago in the Black Lands. There was no way he would reappear. Half a year ago, he would not have been so firm in his conviction. But after all this time had passed in comfort and safety, this way of thinking was deeply rooted in Jiyu Lane. The second thing he noticed was Big Hairy and the Black Bat, as well as the rest of the Neo-Demon horde which stood beneath the shadow of the wild giant. As for the Crow Scout tribe members, Jiyu La completely ignored them. Those two Neo-Demon kings are extraordinary. Having roamed the Western Desert for years, I can say that such Neo-Demons are rarely seen. Jiyu La smiled, not paying too much attention to his pleading apprentice. Hands clasped behind his back, he stood there looking down at the scene. As he spoke, Big Hairy looked up at him. Cruel and cold-killing intent shone in his eyes. Even his white fur seemed to emanate an icy desire to kill. The Black Bat's mysterious eyes narrowed. It could sense an intense pressure emanating from Jiyu Lane. It stared at him, bearing a mouthful of sharp teeth. As for the rest of the Neo-Demons, they trembled beneath the mighty pressure emitted by the flood dragon which floated above them. As for Wu Chen and the others from the Crow Scout tribe, their faces were pale. Seeing the group from the Crow Soldier tribe arrive, as well as the terrifying flood dragon and Jiyu La, they all began to breathe heavily. That's rank 7, Dragoneer Grandmaster Jiyu Lane from the Crow Soldier tribe, blurted Wu Chen. He looked over at Meng Hao, and, seeing his calm expression, suddenly felt a bit better. Meanwhile, up in midair, the other Crow Soldier tribe members started laughing in response to the words Jiyu La had just spoken. Those two Neo-Demons really do look extraordinary. Ha ha ha. Congratulations, Grandmaster Jiyu. You've acquired 2 Neo-Demon Kings today. You're going to be even more powerful than before. Great. Your luck is astonishing, Grandmaster Jiyu. Those 2 are definitely rare Neo-Demons. From the pleasant laughter, it was clear that they meant what they said. These Neo-Demon Kings really were rare. Hearing their words and laughter, Jiyu La's face filled with complacency and happiness. He was truly excited after having seen Big Hairy and the Black Bat. Apprentice offers greetings to Master, said the young man down on the ground. Seeing Jiyu La arrive, he heaved an inward sigh of relief. Suddenly a feeling of arrogance and superiority rose up within him. Master, he continued, backing up even as he shouted, I accidentally happened upon these 2 Neo-Demon Kings. I was just attempting to capture them to give to you as a gift when this guy showed up. He even attacked me and tried to take them away. Master, please take charge of administering justice. He glared at Meng Hao with venomous hatred the entire time, a cold smile covering his lips. I don't care who you are in the Crow Scout tribe, he went on, unable to contain his pompous complacency. You provoked young Master and dared to lay an ambush to take the Neo-Demons Master took a liking to. You're dead for sure. Jiyu La looked over at the wild giant and noted its strange obedience. However, his line of sight was blocked, and still couldn't see Meng Hao. Then he thought about his status in the Crow Soldier tribe, and coolly said, this is a bit improper. Apprentice, these are fellow Taoists from the Crow Scout tribe. You really shouldn't say such evil things about them. I acknowledge my mistake, Master, said the young man, lowering his head and putting on a victimized appearance. However, this guy is really strong. If you hadn't arrived in time, I would definitely have been a corpse already. Having heard what was being said, Meng Hao chuckled, then slowly took a step forward, emerging from the cover of the wild giant. Now, everyone up above could see him clearly. He looked up toward the proud, dignified Jiyu Lane. Even as Meng Hao began to step out, Jiyu La heard his apprentice's words and began to respond, his expression dignified, his jaw lifted up. Well then, let's see who exactly it was that would possibly dare to mess with Jiyu La's disciple. What? Ergic. Jiyu La's eyes went wide. The first part of the end of his sentence, represented shock. The second part, what, represented disbelief. The third part, Jurjijk, was an enormous gasp. Suddenly, he couldn't breathe. His face instantly twisted as if he had suddenly caught sight of an evil spirit just arisen from the Yellow Springs. As he stared down, his mind filled with a roaring sound, as if thunder boomed about inside of it. The roaring inside his mind was actually similar to that of 10,000 horses galloping about inside his skull. His consciousness was trampled, shattered, as he suddenly realized why the wild giant was acting so obediently. Damn you, wild giant, he thought, weeping inwardly. I took care of you all this time in vain. You ran into that inhuman jinx first. Why the hell didn't you at least tip me off? At the same time as this was happening, the surrounding Crow soldier tribe members saw Meng Hao. Their expressions were that of indifference as they began to call out. Fellow Daoist from the Crow Scout tribe, your actions are beyond proper. Since Grandmaster Jiyu La's apprentice saw these neo-demons first, that means he had the right to capture them. For you to steal them in such a fashion is taking advantage of the Crow soldier tribe in an extreme way. It turns out the trifling Crow Scout tribe is full of bandits. I bet that guy is a Crow Scout tribe vassal. Piddling vassal, do you really dare to be so aggressive? I'd love to see if you have the gall to try to kill any Crow soldier tribe members while we're around. Of course, the cultivators who had accompanied Jiyu La had no idea who Meng Hao was. Although he had caused a stir in the Crow Scout tribe, the Great Father and other powerful members of the tribe had interfered with the spread of news. This enabled Meng Hao's identity to remain a mystery. No outsider knew any of the details. Even news of his battle with Mo Fang had been suppressed on strict orders from the tribe. Not a scrap of information had leaked out. Trembling, Jiyu La suddenly said, Ha. Actually, I'm pretty tired today. Take care everyone, I'll take my leave. He immediately began to back up, and was about to turn and transform into a beam of light and flee at top speed when he was blocked by some of the nearby Crow soldier tribe members. Grandmaster Jiyu, what's wrong? Yeah, what's going on, Grandmaster Jiyu? Those two Neo-Demon Kings are matchlessly divine and mighty. It's impossible to be mistaken. Completely impossible. They're definitely Neo-Demon Kings. Oh, it doesn't matter, gushed Jiyu La, his heart shaking. I suddenly remembered that I forgot to feed one of my Neo-Demon hordes. That's unofficial. He shoved off the restraining hands of the Crow soldier tribe members and was about to ignore everyone and leave. However, his young apprentice, seeing Jiyu La about to leave, suddenly shot into the air to block his way. Master, this guy didn't just attack me. When I mentioned your name, he suddenly got all arrogant and bossy. He even insulted you, Master. This is intolerable. Meng Hao watched all of this with a smileless smile. Patting the wild giant next to him, he suddenly realized that this new version of Jiyu La was much more amusing than before. Wu Chen and the others from the Crow Scout tribe were all staring in shock as the scene unfolded. Confused expressions covered their faces. They couldn't understand why Grandmaster Jiyu La would arrive in such an impressive, overwhelming fashion, but then act like this. Without even thinking about it, they looked over at Meng Hao. It wasn't just them. The group from the Crow soldier tribe also could tell that something fishy was going on. Screw off, roared Jiyu Lane. He lifted his hand and was just about to push the young man out of the way when Meng Hao's voice again could be heard. Since you're here, Meng Hao said with a laugh, there's no need to rush off. These words immediately caused Jiyu La to begin to quiver. He slowly turned, forcing a smile onto his face that made it look almost like he was crying. His body began to shake violently, and his mind roared. A roar of frustration and rage echoed out within his heart. How could it be? He thought. This is the Western Desert. It's not the Black Lands. How could he be here? I. Images began to flicker through his mind. That of the first moment he had met Meng Hao, to all the research he had been subjected to, and finally his recent happy days. Now, however, the good times had evaporated into a nightmare that would never go away. How could it be? Ji La felt grief and indignation, but he had no choice but turn blinking to look at Meng Hao and pretend that he had just noticed him. His expression was one of happiness, although all ability to think or even speak had left him. Before he had a chance to say anything to Meng Hao, Ji La's third apprentice noted the fact that his master was turning around and then let out an inward sigh of relief. He turned to glare viciously at Meng Hao. You're dead. You provoked a rank 7 Dragoneer. Even if you are from the Crow Scout tribe, they won't protect you now. The young man was growing even more aggressive. At the moment, he wasn't paying any attention to the two neo-demons next to Meng Hao. In his mind, few people in the 5 tribes of the Crow divinity would possibly dare to enrage his master. Ji La's expression changed, and his heart began to pound.